Which railroad in Red Dead Redemption 2 is the oldest? A few weeks ago, I asked this in a community post, and most of you guys said that the Pacific Union would have been the oldest railroad, but I don't really know if that's correct. Please note, a lot of this is just based off of historical fact and is not actually based off a lot of in-game canon, so if I am wrong here, please feel free to correct me. I figured we would work our way up the chart by starting with the youngest and then working our way up to the oldest. The youngest company in Red Dead Redemption 2 would be the Southern and Eastern. The Southern and Eastern is based off the real-life Southern Pacific Railroad, which that railroad was established in 1865. By 1899, this would mean the railroad was 34 years old, and this would make Cornwall the fourth president of the railroad? Yeah, apparently the presidents on the Southern Pacific either served for really stupid short terms or really stupid long terms. That means the Southern and Eastern would have only had 4 presidents in its entire lifetime.
You serious?
For those of you who don't know, Cornwall gets assassinated in Red Dead, and the railroad becomes a part of the Pacific Union Railroad. Which brings us on to the third oldest railroad, the Pacific Union. The Pacific Union is very clearly just a copy of the Union Pacific Railroad, and the Union Pacific Railroad was established in 1862. This is where things start to become lightly complicated, as we don't know who the president of the Pacific Union is. However, assuming Rockstar is going off of real-life canon, that means the Pacific Union president would probably be the same president as the Union Pacific's president. Following the game's timeline here, then that would make the 11th president of the Union Pacific, Horace Bart, the 11th president of the Pacific Union. I'm aware that I butchered that name. If we keep following the game's timeline to 1907, then that would mean the second president would have came along, and Edward Harrison would have been the 12th president of the Pacific Union. Which brings us on to the oldest railroad, the Central Union Railroad. And I know what you're going to say, Leviathan, New York, you're skipping the Lanahatchee and Midland. And I know, and I'll get back to that in a minute. The Central Union Railroad is based off the real-life Central Pacific Railroad, which was built in 1861, which I've seen dates vary, so technically maybe the Union Pacific could be older. I'm just going to assume it's 1861. Much like the Pacific Union, we don't know who the Central Union's president is either. So assuming that Rockstar is sticking to real-life canon, then that wouldn't make sense because the Central Pacific was bought out, I think, in 1865. Throughout most of its run, I found that the Central Pacific was ran mostly by the California governor, so assuming that Rockstar is sticking with that canon, that would make the 12th president of the railroad James Budd. And I know what maybe one of you is thinking, why did I choose the governor of California and not a governor from Louisiana? And that's because that brings us to the Lanahatchee and Midland. And you're going to have to take what I say here with a massive, massive grain of salt. I don't think the Lanahatchee and Midland is a railroad at all. I think the Lanahatchee and Midland is actually a leasing company, hence why its name says Rail Company on it and not Railroad Company like the other railroads. I feel like this also explains the inconsistent paint schemes and why they're only a freight company, because they're being leased out to companies that need to borrow locomotives like Ansburg. I think there's a random freight company that has a red locomotive. I think the Pinkertons were seen using one of the Lanahatchee and Midland engines at one point, but I don't know if that's right.
Here you are! This is Agent Reed Hickson of the Bureau of Internal Revenue.
I feel like that would also explain why there's no passenger engines. Every other railroad has a passenger train, and Lanahatchee and Midland doesn't. Assuming that the Lanahatchee and Midland is a railroad controlled by the governor, that would make John Peters, the governor in Red Dead Redemption 2, the president of the Lanahatchee and Midland. Now obviously we don't have a photo of the governor in Red Dead 2, so this is just the real-life governor of Louisiana. Now unfortunately I couldn't find much of a reference for what the Lanahatchee and Midland is based off of. Some sources say it's the Virginia and Truckee, but literally the only thing they would have had in common was the fact they said and. And is literally the only thing they have in common. The logo's not the same, the font's not the same, literally nothing else is the same about it. If you're going to believe that they're based off the Virginia and Truckee, then they would have been made in 1869, meaning that they would have been younger than the Southern and Eastern. But I personally don't believe that. Now, this is going to take a lot of personal headcanon here. I personally think the Lanahatchee and Midland must predate the Civil War, seeing as they originally had a red paint scheme, and then they have a black paint scheme. So I'm assuming that it's a Civil War thing and that they had to dull down their paint scheme at some point due to the Civil War, and that's why some engines are black and some engines are red. I like to imagine that the Lanahatchee and Midland was established and founded somewhere between the Central Union and Pacific Union's creation. I feel like this also explains why the Lanahatchee and Midland and Central Union own a lot of the same locomotives.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.
Anyways, this would make John Peters the 17th president of the Lanahatchee and Midland. I also like this because of the very much 2 and 2 thing we've got going on here. You've got the 2 railroads ran by governors, and then you have the other 2 railroads ran by industrialists. I feel like this also explains the paranoia that the Central Union has over the Southern and Eastern.
The land up ahead got bought out from under us and we can't finish the track. Just know this is old Leviticus Cornwall's doing.
The Central Union is ran by a governor, hence less paranoia, and the Southern and Eastern is ran by an industrialist, hence loads of paranoia. I feel like this also explains why Cornwall was pulling government contracts.
It looks like Mr. Cornwall's company has signed a railroad contract with the Army. And they're also moving dynamite down from, well, the Annesburg mines to Saint Denis to resell.
Which I guess does beg the question, why don't they get one of the Lanahatchee and Midland engines to pull the train? Because if the train's owned by the government and they're doing government work, why wouldn't they just use one of their trains? But maybe the only thing I can really think of is plot convenience. My only guess is that they feared putting munitions and dynamite on the same train would cause the train to go boom boom, so they were like, okay, let's just give the problem to another railroad and then they can deal with it. It's almost like they knew the train was going to get blown up. Damn, sell your bomb train to another rival company so that their train goes boom boom. Damn, who's really the more corrupt one here? Again, that's just a theory, but you guys can go ahead and tell me in the comment section how wrong or right I am. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Much like the Pacific Union, we don't know who the Central... Oh my god, there's too many fucking Pacific Central Union fucking...